So the idea of this session is to have a bit of a recap of what we discussed in the previous sessions. And then I'm just going to open it up to anybody who wants to join us, both with video or on the chat, to share something about the event, whether it's something they found, an interesting idea, a new connection they've made. And this is a way of wrapping up. I should say that the platform is going to remain open for another 5 hours. And so if anybody wants to have a follow-up conversation in one of the booths or through video chat, find other people in a networking space, please do so. So why don't we start with Ajoy, as the only male convener of one of the sessions. And I ask you to begin giving us kind of a bit of a formal report on the session, just short. But tell us what were the main findings, main conclusions of your session.
I'm just wondering if Deneen can come onto the stage. It'd be great to have you.
There she is.
Brilliant. So yeah, I wonder if Deneen could kick us off with just a few thoughts. It doesn't have to be a summary, but anything that sort of stands out for you from that session. If you don't mind me putting you in the spotlight.
That was really interesting. I think one, it was good to hear that other people in other think tanks globally are not only aware of issues of inclusion and diversity, but are putting in work to make those changes. And also, and actually also it was a relief to hear that it's not all sort of perfect. It's not like one big conversation and then it's done. There are sort of stumble blocks. It's not a smooth path, but people are willing to put the work in. And also I learned just how complex of an issue it really is. There are a lot of different paths, sort of race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomics, that crossover. So it's a mindful, but it's one that people are interested in putting in the work to change. So it's given me great food for thought and some topped up my level of hope, which was nice.
Great. Thank you, Deneen. That's really nice. I don't have sort of a rigorous summary. I sort of haven't captured everything, but three sort of points which come to mind. I think one of the first things is that in the workplace, it's really hard to sort of disentangle discrimination from, well, I mean, sometimes it's very clear, but sometimes it's really difficult to know when it's just people being mean. And when is it systematic discrimination of a particular group, or because you are different, because it's something to do with your identity? And then when it is discrimination, it's very different to know why. Is it to do with the color of your skin? Is it to do with class, the way you speak? Is it your height? Is it your gender? Other forms of appearance? It's really, really hard. So often I'm sort of left with a bit of paranoia. What was really happening? Why have they been mean? Am I being too sensitive? Or so sometimes it is very clear, and other people can back you up, but sometimes it's not. So I think that's for me that comes up, and I think that sort of raises the issue of, well, if you're not quite sure what's going on and clearly you're feeling really bad, you need to bring this up. But it's really hard to bring these things up in the organizational environment. It's really hard to have these sorts of conversations about discrimination and the other forms of prejudice and difficulty that people are experiencing. Whether it's excessive levels of aggression, blurred sort of accountability lines, senior staff sort of putting junior staff in their place. There's all sorts of dynamics that go on in organizations, and there isn't often a place in the organization to talk about these things. There's often places outside the organization in sort of informal spaces in the pub, which is obviously exclusive. Playing football, we talked about, but that might lend itself to a particular type of people with a particular identity and set of interests. People who sort of fall outside that don't necessarily have a place to air their views. So the challenge is, how can you bring those conversations into the organization and hold it in a way where people will be safe enough to be vulnerable, to talk about what's really affecting them? Do you need to bring people in to manage that conversation? So having the conversation, how difficult it is, that's sort of the second issue. And then the third issue which came up was sort of, these functions that are really key to these think tanks, which is recruitment. You have management and support, to staff. So, to what extent, the questions that come up for me now is sort of, to what extent is there if you want to, what are the objectives around diversity? To what extent does an organization really value recruiting people from diverse different groups? And how is it going to go about recruiting them in practice? What if the pool of people you're looking to recruit from is very small? What are you going to do? Because obviously these bring up sort of system-wide issues. There's issues around, a lot of this is to do with the education system, university system, broader societal issues. To what extent is the think tank going to actually start engaging with those more system-wide issues? Which it probably will have to if it's going to address this issue of recruitment. To what extent it's going to do recruitment outreach, in the wider population. Issues around transparency, good governance, which think tanks like to talk about out there, but are they actually practicing what they preach in here in their own organization? There's questions of affirmative action and quotas, and the resentment that can breed in sort of the majority group, and the fact that it can be abused as well. And then there's issues around when those people are in the organization, are there spaces for sort of people from more diverse backgrounds to bring their feelings, what sort of mentorship might be getting? What sort of professional development are they getting? What kind of conversations are there about diversity within the organization as a whole? Those are some of the things that sort of come up for me from our session on discrimination. But I don't know if, Deneen, you want to add to that?
I'm not sure if I could. You put it all together and wrapped it up really well. I'm not sure there's really much
Great.
to add to it.
Thanks, Deneen. So over to you, panel.
Thank you very much, Ajoy. I think this is a conversation to have, for a while, not just allow it to pass us by. Claire, Dina, do you want to share about your session?
Yeah, so Dina just asked me to share a little bit about our session. So basically what we did was we had like two short inputs from Dina and I. Dina giving like an introduction into what is organizational learning, how can we build a learning organization, starting from the point, that we are learned organization at think tanks, dealing and selling knowledge and like being a step ahead. And how can we, and applying a critical eye to the world around us and to political processes, and how can we apply that same critical eye also to our own internal processes and become a learning organization, and constantly improve and become better. And then I shared a case study, basically some ways of how we went about this, or how are we going about this at the moment at my organization, the German Council on Foreign Relations, and showed like several ways how we try to adapt this learning agenda to digital tools, because this was also, everybody is wondering now, okay, we cannot have face-to-face workshops or after-action reviews or planning sessions. So what could we do online? And we talked about this for a bit, and people were sharing lots of useful tools and experiences in the chat as well. And then we went on to and we actually made a bridge also to a session yesterday on theories of change. How will change happen? With sharing the RSA framework on collective sense making, which I think is a perfect example of how you can, provide some good reflection question and framework for organizational learning. And then we also collected some ideas about like associations of people when they hear the word learning, what they think about that. And we saw that most of us have very positive associations with that. And we also use Google Docs to collect many ideas about like both what we have learned from the crisis and what challenges remain when it comes to opportunities for organizational learning. And then, of course, people said, okay, there's lots of time lacking, but on the other hand, also we have such a steep learning curve when we really, have trained people in virtual facilitation and also saved lots of times on travel. We are getting better at working effectively remotely, et cetera, et cetera. So we have quite a big collection here, and we also shared and participants shared useful links, which we would like to make accessible also to others who couldn't attend our session. And there are basically two messages that we would like to take people home. So one of them is that learning is a muscle to be developed, and people and think tanks have to be comfortable with discussing learning, failure, and improvement. And the second is that, there are two modes of learning that we identified in the crisis. So first of all, it's like learning despite the crisis. So not to put any structures or rituals that you have already established in your organization, don't put them on hold because it's critical for your organization's survival to keep gathering that information. And on the other hand, learning from the crisis. So your impact strategy may no longer make sense. And also, you might have to adapt according to the new needs of your target groups and so on. And on the other hand, learning from the crisis will also increase your resilience for the future. So these are the two messages that we would wanted people to take home. And we also in our workshop we also used like different tools that we were talking about. We used like Google Docs, we used Mentimeter just to show how you can do like reflection online. Maybe Dina, you want to add?
I just want to add one thing. That was a great summary. Just on the topic of diversity, I think we managed to bring this into our session as well, just in two ways. That firstly, not everyone is a digital native. So, what might be easy for you to learn how to hop onto Mural and get it straight away. So it's quite important to onboard people with the technology beforehand, or to stick with simple technology. But also that people are in very different circumstances. So people are working from home, maybe crowded living conditions, poor bandwidth, childcare responsibilities, all sorts of things. We need to remember that the space is not a 5-star hotel with a pumping generator. And diversity, but also I think that if you're going to be talking critically to your colleagues, there's a lot of issues around culture. Mm-hmm. Is it acceptable in your culture to critique your elders, to critique your colleagues? How do you give and receive feedback? There's a lot of things that one needs to think about to establish a relationship of trust and to give permission to be critical and engage as a learning organization.
Yeah, and maybe I think one common denominator is really vulnerability, right? So it's important for learning, and it's important for diversity and improvement in general. So I think this is really like a common ground.
I wonder if we always talk about learning for something, learning, in this case, sometimes learning for impact, learning to be more efficient. From the conversation we had in the discrimination session, I think maybe learning for welfare, like learning to be better organizations in terms of the welfare of our staff. I don't think we think about that too much. I don't think that's an issue that we've ever considered in our M&E frameworks. How are we monitoring and how are we learning about that aspect of the organization? So we're looking at the productivity of staff, but not necessarily their happiness. And
we actually had an example. Yeah, we actually had an example there. So we had it was not really like geared. I think it's still important what you said, like with regard to diversity. What we did is we recognized that people are in as Dina said, we're in the same storm, but not necessarily in the same boat. So we saw that, there are colleagues who have to take care of kids, and all of a sudden they're reduced to like 50% of their work time, because it's just not possible otherwise. And all of these things, and we have already first studies showing that this is also bringing a gender bias with it, so that especially women researchers have been publishing less in the past month because of this. So we have this. So what we did very practically was to just do a staff survey. And then share the results with everyone, and just asking everyone how are they actually coping with this situation, and what are maybe some ways they found individually, just some good practices, how they manage their time, what they need, how they can support each other, and then we shared this. But of course, this is not, this is diversity in a different sense. But I still think it's important to have it in the M&E framework.
Great, thank you. And then I guess something that is outside of the organization, very much outside, but affecting what goes on inside the organization, and can have a huge impact on the impact of the organization and on the welfare of staff. Sonia, you talked about state capture. Can you tell us a little bit about what the discussion was about and what you found?
Yeah, we started the discussion of whether the situation in a number of countries from which the people in the group came from, or with whom they worked with, has remained the same or improved or got worsened since COVID when it comes to the quality of democracy. And actually, the majority of people concluded that the situation deteriorated. So we've actually discussed not only this topic of endangering democracy, but how the rules of the game, the institutions are used legally for the benefit of the few, and that these few people repurpose institutions, justify it through ideology, narratives, and as a consequence limit the political competition, including the challengers to their version of reality, as one of the participants from Argentina mentioned, that might come from think tanks and civil society. So yeah, that was the context we've discussed, and actually more than a half of people said that they lived in a state captured context, and we were discussing how it affects think tanks research. So we heard an example from South Africa of how clientelistic patronage is almost a condition to get research funding, because you need to be affiliated to a political party and there is no fair competition. But also how it affects their functioning. And we've heard, there are different shades. There is no one model of state capture. So there were countries where the plurality of voices was not curtailed, but the noise has increased by government setting up their own NGOs, fake portals, and so on, and giving them space to speak on their behalf and take the focus from the think tanks and other civil society organizations. And quite a few people in the group have also experienced either themselves or members of their organizations being targeted and put under pressure. So yeah, the call was that we continue this discussion as a part of a new community of practice sponsored by think tanks. And the idea was to have a monthly meetings and to use the, actually your mailing platform got the most votes for the preferred channel of communication in between meetings. And there were some ideas on what kind of new knowledge we may produce as part of this mutual support and collaboration. One of the ideas maybe important to mention is not just to create the knowledge that will help us, but also to educate those that we want want to support us. So donors, international organizations, fellow friends in civil society organizations in the more stable countries. So yeah, that's why we also want to have this conversation.
Very much, Sonia. Yes, and the idea, I think, of all three sessions today is to try to encourage an ongoing conversation. And so whether it's through this new online space which we've set up, which hope you'll be willing to try it out, either through online sessions like calls, Zoom calls, or any other means that you find useful, please do continue having these discussions. Now, if anybody wants to join and say a few words before we call it a day and we call it a mini conference, please feel free to ask to join, to share your video and audio, and I'll let you in. But I will let our panel to say anything else if they want to any parting words. And I'll invite Jeff Ganesevich, if he's around, to join so he can get the last word, as it's going to become a tradition for sure. If he's around, maybe he's skipped.
Jeff or John? Because John was usually the last one. Sure.
Yeah, but I think Jeff has been trying. I don't know if John is around. But he is. If John Schwartz, you're around, please do join. Dina, yes.
No, it's from also practices or structures, but talking about discrimination and diversity. I have a really nice exercise that's been sitting in a box for about 15 years. When South Africa, through the transformation process, introduced employment equity legislation, I had a brief stint as an employment equity consultant. And it had some methodologies that I'm happy to share if I can dig them out. I don't even think they were digital, to type them up for you. But it was amazing how people don't think that how their experience and their life history frames their worldview. Even people, particularly the privileged and people who are very liberal, do not think that they are not able to engage with the fact that they are not, especially, I think the liberal are the most difficult ones to crack. They can't recognize that they're being prejudiced or racist or discriminatory or not prepared to let go of their privilege in any way.
I mean, do share that. I'm just sharing a link to a tool that Transparify developed. Till Bruckner and Hans, they developed this tool, and we kind of put it together as a downloadable tool, which is on integrity, and it focuses mostly on funding. But I've always felt that this could be applied to other issues. What it gives you is gives you scenarios, and then you encourage the team or people to think about those scenarios and see how they respond to them. And it's useful as a way of getting people to express what they're thinking, their biases, their own worldviews. And as you say, Dina, it can help to get people to realize that they don't have the same perspective as everybody else, and maybe they have to think about it a little bit. So developing something like that might be quite interesting as a next step. Anyway, since nobody, yes, Sonia.
Just one short point. I want to highlight that this discussion of state capture that should not be perceived as an issue of global South or post-communist countries. Could really happen everywhere. And today we started the discussion on new politics, and whether we will call it a new normal or old normal. I think these challenges to democracy and attacks on civil society are going to stay present. So I think we need within the think tanks community to continue this discussion on more links between think tanks and politics, beyond the fair competition.
It's true. I think on our first conference in London, Goran Buldiowski, who joined us on day one, he referred to this. He sort of said, it's time funders, international development funders, paid attention to what was going on in developed countries, in the US or in the UK and parts of Europe, because if the populist leaders or the nationalist leaders in those countries get away with it, then it would be easy for leaders in the developing world to say, well, look at them, they're doing it, why not us? And so we should not think that this is just a developing country or a global south problem. For sure, just like the issue of discrimination, which is being discussed in the global north, probably more than in the global south, in this particular context, is not an issue of a particular part of the world. So with that in mind, hopeful that these mini conferences plus all the other efforts we make to engage with the think tanking audience around the world has brought you together and has helped to make new connections and helped you to get to know new people, maybe strengthen old connections. I hope you had a good time. As I said, the conference is still open. The space is still open for a few more hours. You're welcome to explore the videos, join anybody you talk to in one of the booths if you want to have a follow-up conversation, or check out the networking space to see who else is out there. Otherwise, we'll be sending you an email soon with the videos, notes. Please share your notes with us if you want to. Share them via our short articles that we'll be more than happy to publish on the On Think Tanks platform. Share them via social media using Twitter, Facebook, or any other media you find more useful and more relevant to your own context. And let's continue the conversation. Please join Ajoy, Sonia, and Dina, and Claire in their communities of practice that we hope to support. Well, in the conversation that we hope to support, and we'll see you soon. We're going to try to organize another event in September, maybe a slightly different format based on some lessons learned, but we're trying things out this year, and we will certainly be meeting again face-to-face in the future. Claire, you want to say a few? You want to have the final word?
No. I'm still waiting for Jeff, though. No. I just wanted to repeat a question that came up in our session, and that was, how can people sign up for the COPs? Right.
So we'll be sending an email soon to everybody who was on the website, and we will on this conference, and we will also be posting information about signing up on our website and letting people know. So you'll get detailed instructions about how to sign up. But if you have Ajoy, Sonia's, or Dina and Claire's contact information, just follow up directly as well and continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
It was a great conference.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Ciao.